It's funny you say that because I think naturally I'm quite a pessimist. So definitely at university, my friends kind of saw me as quite a negative person in lots of ways. I could moan quite a lot actually,
Mm.
and was always very anxious about all of the things that could go wrong. But I think what I discovered through my career, long before I started writing these books, but when I was just investigating and writing about the human psychology, was that actually we do just have this enormous potential for change. And often that is through incremental changes to our beliefs, our actions, our kind of habits. But what you find is that even those tiny little changes that you make day by day, they add up really quickly. And so you can be really surprised even within a few months for how much progress you've made if you just focus on the small things and take it kind of step by step. And so that's something that does um, come through, I think, in all of my books. And I'd say, it starts, like you say, with the intelligence trap, where you know, primarily I was asking, why do so many intelligent people make so many stupid mistakes? And actually, through researching that question, I discovered that there are lots of different ways that we can all improve our reasoning abilities and make the most of our intelligence. And again, it's often just applying small evidence based strategies to do so.
So maybe you with two things we could do. Uh, Before I'd like you to talk about some of these stupid decisions we make, but how are you defining intelligence?
Mm. So, I was kind of just using the kind of very well accepted definition of intelligence in psychology, which is
Mm.
what we measure by IQ tests, and
Oh,
it's kind of been seen as this general brain power, kind of underlying mental energy, as it was first considered back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. But we do know there's a kind of biological basis for that to some degree, that people with higher IQs have better connected brains. So they have more efficient neural networks that allow them to process information a bit more quickly. And so they do tend to learn things more rapidly. They can grasp abstract concepts a little more quickly than the average person. So that is then reflected in their educational attainment, which is exactly how it should be, since they were primarily designed, first of all, not to measure anything bigger than educational attainment. They were just there to predict who was going to do well at school and who was going to struggle and need more help. So the IQ tests are doing exactly what they were intended to do. And as a measure of intelligence, it's fine as long as we recognize that it's kind of actually quite limited to those contexts. Now, what I discovered then was that in lots of other contexts, the skills that are measured by IQ tests, at that kind of abstract reasoning, that speed of processing, are not always conducive to wise or logical behavior, um, which is why we see a lot of smart people like Nobel Prize winners also doing crazy things or having some very odd beliefs. And so in the book, I kind of try to say, well, if the intelligence measured by IQ tests is like it's like the kind of power of the engine of a vehicle, of a car, then you need lots of other kind of checks and balances to make sure that you're driving in the right direction to get to your destination. So, like a good GPS, suspension, a powerful steering wheel. And that's what we've maybe been ignoring in the past with our education system. But what I show is that actually all of those other skills are eminently teachable and can be um, and we, no matter what our age and no matter what our kind of baseline intelligence, we can pick up those skills.
so I suppose in my mind, what I'm equating intelligence to is life skills.
Mm,
Um, each of us want to go through life and function very well in life, and a
yeah,
lot of your writing points people towards that. And to some degree, intelligence sets you up to do that. But in many ways, it's a disadvantage. And when you're talking about the car, I'm thinking it sounds like someone could have this like Ferrari engine, but inadequate brakes,
yeah,
or no windscreen, and
yeah,
then and I suppose I'm thinking of the highly intelligent person with very poor social skills or something. So they're really, really smart, but they don't work well in life because they don't have the ability to connect with people or communicate or don't have empathy. Is that part of it?
Yeah, definitely that is part. So Robert Sternberg, who's based in the US, he came up with this idea of kind of three different types of intelligence. So there was
Mm.
analytical intelligence, which is basically those kind of non-verbal questions you would have in IQ tests, and the abstract thinking that I mentioned there. Then you have creative.
Like your mathematician and scientist fall into that
Right, but
category.
also, writers could do, because if they, having a large vocabulary is also something that correlates very strongly with IQ. But then you have creative intelligence. So that is not just being artistic, but that's also, say, being able to imagine alternative alternative outcomes of events. So recognizing that, there could be lots of different ways of events unfolding and lots of different perspectives. And then there's practical intelligence, which is the kind of people skills that you mentioned, also kind of metacognitive skills, we would call them. So being able to prioritize, to lay out a plan and then carry out that plan, to foresee the potential obstacles and preempt them. And all of them turn out to be very important for success. So, you could have someone who's really brilliant at learning science. Like, they can memorize those formulae and they can get those concepts instantly. And on the page, they can solve a problem rapidly. But they might just be hopeless at project management, which is a form
Mm.
of practical intelligence. And so they're never going to proceed well within a scientific career, because they're not actually going to be able to execute the experiments that will be really important for their discoveries, and to work with lots of collaborators, get their work published. So you can see, even within academia, those different kinds of intelligence that maybe we haven't been focusing on so much in our education are already playing a strong part. But I would say, what I look at more in the book is also what is now being studied seriously scientifically, and this is like wisdom. So that is much more about, how are you applying your intelligence to achieve what you want in life, and that could be
Mm.
different for individuals, but it would be stuff like, can you have the relationships that you want? Can you have the career that you want? Can you do you look after your health? Do you form political opinions that are kind of consistent and based on facts rather than misinformation? So that kind of thing too. And what we see is that, there are good scientific tests of that, and also that can be trained very well, um, in a way that's not at all at odds with our current educational systems. In fact, what you find is that when you train things like wise thinking, when you train that creative thinking or practical skills, actually people perform better in all of the traditional measures of success too. So it's really, I was quite excited writing the intelligence trap, because I felt like it gave this ambitious new vision for what education can achieve and how it would actually help individuals and society to grow and develop. In the ways that we would want, so that each citizen is more responsible for their own actions.
A key part of that seems to be some degree of self-awareness.
Right.
And and maybe part of the intelligence trap is when you are highly intelligent, you make the assumption that you make the assumption that I can make good decisions in all areas where clearly that turns out not to be the case. And you have some great examples of that, of some incredibly intelligent people who can also have some bizarre beliefs and make some bizarre decisions.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so that phenomenon is called earned dogmatism, and I think the best example is this guy Carey Mullis, who's now quite popular amongst the kind of far right, actually. But anyway, he discovered the polymerase chain reaction. So that's the PCR and the PCR test we were all taking during COVID.
Yeah.
It was like just this flash of insight that he had while driving along the motorway in California. That he just kind of visualized how this would work, and then it turned out to be true, and it was really fundamental in transforming biology. So we use it in medical tests. That's where the normal person, comes across that, very often. But it also transformed the way we could do things like transcribe genomes. So it was essential for working out, all of the genes that are responsible for so many different illnesses, for so many different abilities. Really kind of almost generated whole new areas of biological science.
So that an enormous contribution to
Right,
humanity, right there. I mean, enormous.
that's it. So you can't deny that he was
You can't deny genius level.
genius.
I'm going to
Yeah,
say. I
but
mean,
then
really.
then he wrote his autobiography a few years after he won the Nobel Prize, and it turns out he believes in all of these things that just the vast majority of scientists would never agree could be true. And I think most logical thinkers would say there's just not the evidence behind them. So he believed in that there exists this kind of paranormal astral plane. He uh, he denied that the HIV virus was causing the AIDS epidemic, and that is so well established. And it was, even once we had all of this evidence, he still denied it. He denied that CFCs were causing the hole in the ozone layer. He denied that humans were causing global warming. His views were totally contrary to the huge weight of evidence there. And it's just like you said, he felt like because he had this kind of flash of genius, he was obviously incredibly intelligent. He felt that he could trust his intuitions and that they would always, what he felt to be true would always be true, even when there was, mountains of evidence contradicting him. Yeah,
Yeah, I suppose it's the danger of thinking you're the smartest person in the room. And
right.
I've been in business for decades, and the one thing is about business is it straightens you out pretty quick. I mean, you're either right or you're wrong. Yeah, and if you're right, the business is successful. If you're wrong, it's not. So we don't debate. But I suppose if I want to insist, if I want to talk about the paranormal or the ozone layer, or maybe we can have a debate. Maybe we can
Yeah.
have a debate in that. So maybe from a scientific point of view, he feels that his opinion can be right. Business is more humbling. Maybe science is more tolerant. I don't know.
Right, yeah, no, I see. I think like you say, I agree with you on business, but I really feel like science, a good scientific mind should be able to come up with a hypothesis, then you look at the evidence for and against it, and you update your opinion according to that. So it was totally right that we should have people who are questioning the consensus. But
Yes,
with
yeah.
something like the link between HIV and AIDS, it's just when you have more and more evidence coming to those conclusions, and then you have clear signs of cause and effect because we have these antiretroviral drugs that are amazingly
Well, I
effective
think
now at reducing
when you're
HIV
treating
and
when you're
preventing the
treating the
symptoms.
disease enormously effectively.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
the lives of HIV/AIDS sufferers has transformed
yeah,
enormously. I imagine in the past 2 decades. I don't know exactly the
yeah.
time
No,
frame.
it really has. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
no
the
longer.
evidence they now live with it by taking one pill a day or something.
Right, yeah, it's not the death sentence that it once was. But right
Yes,
up
yeah,
until his death, he was still maintaining this bizarre view. And so that to me, you know, that is stupidity to me. And that's what I
yeah,
found fascinating with the intelligence trap is that you really can be incredibly intelligent and incredibly stupid. And
yeah.
scientists have a name for that. They call it dysrationalia. So there's this guy called Keith Stanovich that designed a test that was looking specifically at kind of rational thinking. So how susceptible we are to cognitive biases, how logically we can appraise evidence, how good our critical thinking skills are.
Mm.
And what he showed is that there's not a perfect correlation between the two. So which essentially means you can be very intelligent but have very low rationality.
I suppose the reality of it is, with all of us, we all have a set of skills that we take through life. And there's no doubt on certain things you will far surpass my skill level. But guarantee we'll find something where I far surpass your skill level. I mean, that's just the nature of reality. But I suppose if I'm a phenomenal tennis player, I won't assume that makes me a genius in the science lab. But maybe when someone is just highly intelligent, that just is it arrogance?
Yeah, so I think so. One of the kind of core elements of wisdom, according to like Igor Grossman, who's the kind of lead psychologist here. So he's based at the University of Toronto, or possibly the University of Waterloo, actually. But he um, intellectual humility is a core element of wisdom for him, because it stops us from making that arrogant assumption that we kind of already know everything there is to know. And so we don't need to update our opinions. We don't need to look for new information, new sources. The intellectually humble person will always be open to being contradicted, because they will want to appraise in the ways that they might be wrong, and then update their opinions accordingly and form a more nuanced, more complex view of the world around them. So that's why intellectual humility is so fundamental to wisdom, because it prevents us from falling into that intelligence trap that people like Kerry Mullis fell into.
So it's easy to talk about very highly intelligent people because they stand out amongst us. And it's also easy to see how they would fall into this trap of being highly intelligent and lacking wisdom. But in your research, did you find that it also impacts on everyday people? I mean, how is the listener? I'm not saying my listeners aren't highly intelligent, but where in our lives do we need to look for that? Off the top of my mind, one thing is coming because I've been a keen investor for decades, and one of the things that they found in investing was that people like very successful people like uh, doctors and dentists and surgeons made lousy investors, and the reason was because first they were highly intelligent and successful and wealthy, and they knew this, and they assumed that that skill transferred into the investing world,
Yeah.
and it's of no value to you in the investing world. But they made this assumption that when they entered the investing world, that they had this intelligence, and continually lost money until they realized no, it's not a transferable skill. So I'm just wondering, to me, that's a very practical example
Yeah.
where you know it can cost you money.
Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect example, actually. And again, what you might find is that someone who, was incredibly intelligent and skilled at their previous profession or their current profession, if they then had that intellectual humility to be able to recognize, well, I have to learn from scratch, then they will perform so much better, so much more quickly. And we actually see that when you look at like people's academic achievement, even like obviously people with the high IQs have the advantage, but people with high intellectual humility also have a huge advantage that can actually counterbalance a lack of intelligence. So I think, no matter what your IQ is, no matter how you've performed previously, I think to just constantly be questioning, could I be wrong about this? What more can I learn? How can I refine my approach? That is the secret to success that will help you to get to your goals much more quickly, no matter what your kind of baseline level of brain power is. And I think that's something we can all remember. So, whether we've been traditionally considered to be smart or not, just showing that open minded, we call it in psychology active open minded thinking, that is so essential. And I think, like you say, like investment in particular is so fundamental to be able to learn those skills that are going to be essential for making money.
A business mentor of mine many, many years ago used to say, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be rich?"
Right.
And I think he was making the point: Are you going to argue for the fact that you're right, or do you want to find the way that's going to make you money? And I think that brings humility. I suppose it's interesting because um, when I was listening to you speak about the expectation effect, I I was so impressed by our human potential and the human potential to do things and to impact our body in ways that seem magical also. But i but it seems to me that intelligence is something we are probably, apart from all this ability we may have, intelligence is something we were born with. When you and I came on the planet, we were probably given some degree, however our brains were wired, one was more intelligent than the other, higher IQ than the other. And I know neuroplasticity and all these things, but am I right in saying that to some degree is fixed? That our IQ is not going to change throughout our life or enormously.
Yeah. So the scientific answer to that is quite nuanced, actually.
Okay,
So
right. It's the scientific answer I'm wondering
yeah,
about.
because so what you see actually is that for young children, environment is more important than genes. So
In developing IQ.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and I think that makes sense. You've got parents who kind of can read to their children every day. They're already using a big
Mm,
vocabulary around the dinner table. In your home environment at that age, that's going to make a big difference for how well you do in preschool. Like
yeah.
whether you arrive there already knowing the alphabet, being a kind of independent reader without having to have the teacher kind of guide you for every word. So, when you measure intelligence at those ages, it looks like the environment is everything. Now, the thing is that because we have like educational institutions in place now that are designed to help people who are falling behind to catch up, what you
Mm,
find is that the genetic component actually, or the home environment, becomes less important as the child gets older, and the genetic component tends to take over. So if you have, and it's a whole multitude of genes, there's like no single one gene, it's hundreds of
mm,
genes that can influence intelligence. But if you have like a good combination of those that make you um, kind of curious, that help you to form those neural networks very quickly, that can help you to process information more efficiently, then over time you do start to kind of take the lead against people who don't have that genetic advantage.
mm,
And so in IQ tests, because you're taking advantage of all of those educational opportunities, that kind of then feeds back into the how you perform an IQ test as well, just because you're training yourself to think more abstractly, to through mathematics, through building your vocabulary, all of those things. So actually, by the time we get to our 20s, our genes can influence our intelligence by about 60 to 70%, which is quite large. But then after that point as well, like our lifestyle again begins to have more of a role, because as we get older, when we go through middle age and old age, how you're protecting your brain is hugely important. So are you drinking excessively, smoking a lot, eating unhealthily, not doing any exercise? All of those are going to lower your IQ as you get older. But people who are physically active, who do look after their health, they're going to maintain their intelligence. And if they then stay mentally active, so they're still building um, their abilities in abstract thinking, past education, they can then kind of take the lead again over the people who might have had the genetic advantage. So, it's a real mix throughout the life, and it
yeah.
changes. But I think what's promising to all of us is that there are all of these things that we can do at any stage of life that do give us an advantage. So even though it is to some extent fixed by our genes, that doesn't mean that it has to be our destiny.